They say funerals bring closure, but what no one tells you is that walking into the church where your father's casket waits, after 12 years of silence, is less about saying goodbye and more about being buried alive by everything that was never said. The whispers, the stares, the smell of old perfume and old resentment. It all wraps around you like a dress that doesn't fit anymore, but you wear it anyway. 12 years had passed since I last stepped foot in Lexington, Kentucky, yet the air still smelled like guilt and honeysuckle. I arrived alone, late afternoon, the sky a pale gray as if unsure how to mourn a man like Richard Thatcher. My father, a man who built houses from bricks in silence, the same man who hadn't called me since the day I chose a paintbrush over spreadsheets. The funeral was held in the same Presbyterian chapel he made us attend every Sunday as kids. The pews were filled with family tales no one dared say out loud, with people who hadn't spoken my name in years but never forgot how to twist it. "She's just here for the inheritance," Amanda muttered to her mother. I heard it. Amanda never knew how to whisper, only how to wound in cursive. Derek stood tall in the front, as if the pulpit belonged to him now. He had that slicked back hair and corporate stiffness that made him look exactly like the man our father wished I had been. When he saw me, his smile curled at the edge like spoiled milk. "Didn't think you'd show," he said loud enough for people to turn. "Still chasing those little revenge stories in your art, huh?" He always knew how to make cruelty sound casual. I didn't answer. I just walked past him, heels echoing on the tile like apologies never made. I found a place in the back, invisible. It fit me well. No one offered a hug. No one offered a word. They didn't need to. Their silence was curated, just like the legacy Derek now curated in father's name. Everything had been handed to him: the house, the company, the name, even the narrative. And I, the daughter who left, became the easy villain in this family tale. The last memory I had of my father that wasn't soaked in disappointment was a late summer afternoon on Lake Cumberland. He taught me how to cast a line, said patience was a kind of power. We ate soggy sandwiches and didn't say much. It was the last time he looked at me like I was still his daughter. The day I got my acceptance letter to the Vermont College of Fine Arts, he stopped calling. When I didn't show up to orientation at his alma mater's business school, I was erased. They say forgiveness is for the strong, but what if the real strength is admitting how deeply you've been hurt? I watched the minister speak about Richard as a pillar of the community, a builder of homes. But the man I knew tore down the one that mattered most. Ours. When they asked if anyone wanted to speak, Derek stood. I remained seated. My hands wrapped around my sketchbook, the only thing I trusted in this room. No one looked at me. No one needed to. I wasn't there to speak. I was there to carry the weight of being uninvited. There are moments you realize just how thoroughly someone can steal not only your future, but your memory. Derek had taken it all. Even the photo on the memorial table was just him and Dad, no trace of me. As the service ended, I sat a moment longer than the rest. I didn't cry. I was past that. But I did wonder, how many times do we let others tell our story before we start telling it ourselves? Hidden revenge doesn't always come with screaming or scandal. Sometimes, it's simply showing up in the room where no one thought you belonged. And breathing anyway. Because that's where this story starts. And I'm not leaving it untold. The most painful betrayals don't come from enemies, they come wrapped in silence, hidden in the soft spaces where love should have lived. What if the past you've been grieving wasn't the truth, but a version filtered through someone else's bitterness? What if your greatest regret wasn't what you did wrong, but what someone made others believe you did? How do you reclaim a story that's already been told without you in it? I sat at Lydia's kitchen table, sipping black coffee that tasted like old memories. Portland felt a lifetime away, and this house, filled with overgrown ivy and the smell of cedar, was the only place in Lexington that didn't make my skin itch. "I used to write him," I said quietly. "Letters. Real ones. Handwritten. And emails too, every few months," I called. Nothing ever came back. Lydia nodded, as if she'd been waiting years for me to say it. I never answered any of them. Not once. She reached across the table, her hand landing softly on mine. "Derek told everyone you stopped writing after you asked for money." I stared at her, the words barely settling before they splintered inside me. A true infidelity story wasn't always about lovers. It was also the betrayal of blood, of someone rewriting your absence with their own version of events. That afternoon, I wandered behind the main house, through the back where the garden shed leaned like an old secret. The gardener, an older man with sun-worn skin and soft eyes, paused from pruning a rose bush. He looked up at me and said, He used to ask why you didn't come back. Not angrily, just like a father who missed his kid. I stopped breathing for a second. Inside the shed, beneath piles of yellowing blueprints and cracked toolboxes, I found it, a weather-stained cardboard portfolio sealed with brittle string. My name was written in faded Sharpie across the top. Inside was a watercolor I had painted the year I turned 23. A rooftop skyline of Portland, with one lone figure standing beneath a street lamp. I had sent it to my father. No note, just that image. I remember hoping he'd see himself in the figure. He never responded. The painting had been folded in half, thrown into a pile, forgotten like the daughter who'd made it. Later that night, Lydia and I sat side by side on the porch swing. The air smelled like rain and something unresolved. "You know what hurts most?" I said. "Not that he didn't want me, but that someone made him believe I didn't want him." Back in the house, I opened my old email account. Password still worked. Hundreds of unread emails, most were junk. But then, a folder I didn't remember creating. Labeled drafts. Inside it were my letters. Ones I had written, ones I knew I sent. All still marked unsent. My breath caught. I grabbed my phone, checked the call logs from my 20s. All those unanswered calls I left on his machine. All redirected to an unknown number. In my childhood room, now storage, I found a wooden drawer I used to hide candy in. Underneath old report cards, a torn envelope peeked out. Half of a letter. My father's handwriting. I want you to know I've been wrong. About more than I can say here. If you'll ever let me. The rest was missing. Ripped. I sat there, holding that half letter like it was the other half of my life. And I realized those 12 years of silence weren't random. They were built. Carefully. Deliberately. Brick by brick of someone else's resentment. Until my father and I couldn't hear each other through the wall. I had lived 12 years mourning a father who, maybe, never meant to let me go. That night, in Lydia's guest room, I broke. The kind of crying that starts in your gut and shakes everything loose. My fists pressed into my ribs as if I could hold the ache in place. Lydia sat beside me. She didn't say a word. "I didn't just lose a father," I whispered. "He was taken from me." Have you ever realized someone stole your story while you were too hurt to notice? Outside, the wind picked up, rustling the trees like they too had something to confess. I pressed my palm to the glass, and for the first time, I didn't just grieve him. I began to miss the man I never got to know. Not because he didn't love me, but because someone made sure I never got the chance. And that kind of betrayal, that's the kind that writes its own revenge. There's a particular ache in walking into a room where everyone assumes they already know your worth. And it's somewhere between forgettable and expendable. But what if the truth didn't die with the man they called a father, but waited quietly in a flash drive no one expected? What if the dead had one last confession, and it wasn't just about money, but about the damage done when you believe the wrong child? The conference room smelled like leather, cologne, and discomfort. I sat in the far corner, not because anyone asked me to, but because sometimes silence teaches you to take up less space than you deserve. Derek, of course, sat at the head of the table like he'd been born there. Cufflinks, pressed suit, smirk. He leaned back, crossed his arms, and said loud enough for the board members to hear, "Let's not waste time. This is a formality. Everyone knows Whitman and Sons stays in the family." He didn't look at me. He didn't need to. His definition of family never included me. Holden, our father's attorney, cleared his throat. "Before we proceed with the reading of the formal document, Mr. Thatcher left a video recording with instructions to play it only when all parties were present." Derek's eyes narrowed. "A video?" Holden nodded, inserting a small USB into the laptop. "Yes, recorded 3 months before his passing. At his request, the screen flickered, and there he was. My father. Still alive in that image. Gray hair combed, voice steady. The man who'd built homes and walls in equal measure. If you're seeing this," he began, "then I've already left this world. And I suspect things haven't been easy." He looked down. Then back up, eyes soft in a way I barely remembered. "This message is for you, Emily." Gasps whispered across the table. I didn't move. I didn't blink. For too long, I let others speak on your behalf. I believed what was easier, not what was true. That was my failure as a father. The room grew still. Even the AC hum seemed to stop. "I saw your paintings, Emily. I followed your career quietly. I told myself you abandoned us, but the truth is, I never picked up the phone either, and that silence became my shame." My fingers tightened around the sketchbook on my lap. I couldn't look at anyone. Not Derek. Not Holden. Not the room full of men who thought I came here for scraps. "And if you're hearing this," he continued, Then I want you to know. I've changed my will. All shares of Whitman and Sons will transfer to Emily Thatcher. She will be the new principal stakeholder. The air cracked. Derek stood so quickly his chair screeched. What the hell is this? She's an artist. She doesn't know the first damn thing about business. Holden held up a hand. Please let the video finish. My father, still on screen, continued calmly as if he'd anticipated this. Derek, I know this will anger you. But choices have consequences. I saw what I didn't want to see. Corners cut, names forged, loyalties traded for control. You tried to protect my legacy by destroying hers. No one dared move. To Emily, he said, you don't have to become me. Build something new. Something better. Don't carry my shame. Carry your light. The video ended. No dramatic music. No final bow. Just silence. Derek's face was a storm that hadn't decided if it wanted to rage or explode. She doesn't deserve this, he growled. She's nothing but I stood. Slowly. Still holding my sketchbook. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I simply said, you don't have to believe in me, he did. And I walked out. On the way down the hallway, I whispered to myself, I won't do it like he did. That was the promise. That was the burden, and maybe the freedom too. Because sometimes the person left out of the will is the one who carries the most truth. Have you ever felt like the story you belonged to wasn't written with you in mind? Only to realize, you were the one meant to rewrite it all along. That day didn't give me back a father, but it gave me a map. A messy, painful, beautiful map of how to begin again. Not in his name, but in mine. And maybe that's where true healing starts. Even in stories cheating you of time, there's still a place for redemption. Even in betrayal stories dressed as tradition, a daughter can rise, not out of revenge, but out of something harder, forgiveness. Sometimes, the hardest place to return to isn't your hometown. It's the version of yourself you left behind there. The girl who never felt seen. The woman no one believed in. But what if showing up, messy, unsure, heart still cracked, was the first act of courage? And what if just being there, standing where no one expected you to, was already a kind of quiet, human revenge? The house was colder than I remembered. Not cold in the way a thermostat could fix. Cold in the way a place becomes when love has long since exited its walls. The Thatcher house sat like a wounded giant, rooms echoing with absence, closets hiding more than clothes. I moved in with a suitcase and a sketchbook, and a loneliness I didn't have a name for yet. Day 1, the board met without smiling. Suits and silence. Someone cleared his throat and said, "We thought you'd sell your shares and leave." Another, less polite, muttered, "She's a painter. What the hell does she know about concrete and zoning?" I didn't answer. I didn't have to. The answer was in how tightly I held that folder of unread plans my father left. Half-sketched drawings, one labeled in handwriting I hadn't seen in years for her. If she wants, I did want. But want doesn't always look like confidence. It sometimes looks like hiring a woman twice your age who used to argue strategy with your father over whiskey and deadlines. Janet Burke arrived on my third day. Blunt bob. Stern jaw. Eyes that had seen empires built and buried. "He was brilliant," she said of my father, "but he left you a mess. So let's begin." Outside, the media wasn't as kind. Painter inherits empire. One headline snarked. From brushes to boardrooms. Art major becomes accidental CEO. I didn't respond. But I clipped them, taped them inside the back of my sketchbook, just to remember what they said before they knew better. Derek, of course, wasn't finished. He filed an appeal, claimed emotional manipulation, diminished capacity, anything that might unravel the will. The court disagreed. The will held, but so did his resentment. Then Kyle left. He'd been head of development, worked here since I was 10. On his way out, he looked at me and said, "You're not tough enough for this." He meant it. I could tell, but I didn't follow him out the door. Instead, I found my father's old blueprint files, half-finished projects, scribbled ideas, notes he never shared. Among them build if brave enough. That night, I didn't cry. I picked up a pencil, first time in 3 years. I started to draw again, not for them, not even for him, for me. Janet found me at 2 a.m. "Still here?" "I'm not going anywhere," I told her, and I meant it. We held a staff meeting in the break room because the conference room felt like enemy territory. I stood with trembling hands and said, "I don't know everything. Maybe I don't even know enough yet. But I know this: I'm here, and I'm staying." Someone laughed softly in the back, not cruelly, just surprised. That night, I painted a piece I called Still Standing. It wasn't beautiful, but it was real. What do you do when the people who are supposed to believe in you simply don't? Do you give them the satisfaction of disappearing? Or do you stay, even when every bone in you screams to run? I stayed. And in the quiet of a cold house, I whispered to myself, maybe I don't deserve this. But maybe I don't have to. Maybe I just have to choose it anyway. Because family revenge stories don't always end in shouting matches and slammed doors. Sometimes they end with a woman sitting alone at a desk built for someone else, deciding to make it hers anyway. The truth doesn't rot overnight. It sits, buried beneath boardroom carpet and family nameplates, until someone dares to dig. And when they do, the lie doesn't collapse, it breathes. What if the legacy you inherited was built on silence, not strength? What if your last name was just the wrapping paper over a wound that never healed? Would you still carry it, or would you dare to clean the wound and start over? I found the folder by accident. If there is such a thing in a house full of ghosts, tucked inside a drawer marked maintenance logs, it didn't look like much. Just manila paper yellowed by time, a red sticker that read Infidelity said Argero. I opened it, expecting blueprints or repair notes. But the first page wasn't technical, it was a statement from a foreman and a timeline of an accident. A death actually. A scaffolding collapse. One worker injured, another, gone. It happened under Derek's watch. No charges were ever filed. No public announcement ever made. Janet sat across from me at the long oak table. Why wasn't this investigated? I asked. She sighed, long and heavy. Because your family paid to make it disappear. Settlements. Non-disclosure agreements. And frankly, the town was tired of fighting. Cedar Grove was supposed to bring in jobs. All it brought was grief. This wasn't just a family betrayal. This was the rot beneath the paint. I thought of that man's name. George. Written in a corner note in the file, no obituary clipped, no condolence letter attached, just an asterisk. A footnote in my family's empire. Later that night, I found a letter slipped under the door. No return address. Handwritten. We never got an apology. Not even once. He was our brother. Cedar Grove was our home. Now it's just hollow frames and forgotten promises. I drove out the next morning. The site was a ghost town of unfinished walls and wind through broken beams. It didn't feel haunted. It felt abandoned, like shame with a zip code. Standing there, among weeds and dust, I didn't see a failed real estate project. I saw what it could have been, what it still could be. When I returned to the office, I proposed something radical: tear it down. Not the structures, just the silence. Rebuild Cedar Grove as a community arts hub and low-income housing initiative. Free classes, shared spaces, studios for young artists and displaced locals. The board stared at me like I'd offered to repaint the walls with watercolor. Are you going to fix a collapsed roof with a paintbrush? One of them scoffed. No. I said softly, but without blinking. I'm going to fix a broken promise with honesty. Silence. Then someone laughed. Then another shifted in their seat. But no one said no. That night, I walked to the old mailbox at the edge of the property. The one we never used, the one rusted shut. I pried it open and found a tube wrapped in wax paper. Inside, a sketch. Rough lines, shaky but deliberate. A plan labeled Emily's Vision. It showed a building with open walls, garden spaces, a roof lined with skylights. A space for beauty. A space for healing. He never showed it to me. But he'd drawn it, for me, and for the first time, I wondered had he wanted to make things right too. But never knew how. Is it ever too late to finish what someone else started? Especially when what they started was a lie. I don't know if I'll fix everything. I don't even know if the town will forgive. But I do know this: I won't carry the family name as a shield. I'll carry it like a seed. Something that might still grow, if given the light and air it was always denied. This isn't about revenge anymore. This is about restoration. And maybe the most burning revenge of all is doing what should have been done, with grace. Becoming something you never asked to be isn't a triumph. It's a test. And when the world watches, waiting for you to stumble, the real battle isn't against them. It's the voice inside that says, maybe they're right. But what if leadership isn't about perfection or pedigree, but about showing up with your hands open, not clenched? What if true strength is simply choosing integrity in a world built on compromise? The boardroom was colder than the grave. 12 men, 3 women. Not a smile among them. I felt them weigh me with every blink, as if leadership could be measured by shoulder pads and stock returns, not resilience or soul. The first to speak was Mr. Latimer, vice chair. We've had interest from a Canadian developer. Full buyout of our mixed-use properties. It's a lucrative exit. He looked right at me. We recommend it. I kept my hands folded. I don't. Silence. This company was built to serve communities. I added. Not cash out on them. Someone scoffed. And just like that, I became the sentimental one, the artist, the woman who dared to say no when the spreadsheet said yes. It might have ended there, but then Thomas Green spoke. Gray hair, soft voice, eyes that had seen my father's rise and his unraveling. I remember Richard saying, "Don't build if you wouldn't live in it yourself. I say we hear her out." His words bought me 3 more minutes. I pitched a restructuring plan, transparency in bidding, more women in executive roles, and a quarterly review of ethical standards. It sounded idealistic, because it was. But idealism is just ethics without apology. For now. Later that day, the press came for blood. From easel to empire, artist CEO redefines nar vide. A blogger asked if I was painting my way through quarterly losses. A cheating stories podcast even spun a false tale about my personal life, hinting at a secret affair with Thomas. I laughed, then cried, then laughed again. Lydia showed up with chamomile tea and a folder of sketches. "You need to remember who you are," she said, "before they convince you you're only who they say you are." So I wrote. Every night, I journaled, small truths whispered back to myself through ink. I'm not my father. I'm not Derek. I'm not afraid. That week, we held a company town hall. I stood before 100 employees, my voice trembling like it was balancing on a tightrope. "I'm not going to pretend I know everything," I began. "But I do know this. No title, no legacy, no last name gives me the right to ignore you. So I won't." The next morning, a note was left in my mailbox. From George, the maintenance tech. "You're the first CEO who's asked me what I need. That matters more than you know." I kept it in my drawer. Not for the compliment, for the clarity, because family tales aren't always told around dinner tables. Sometimes, they come in crumpled notes from men in dusty uniforms who see more truth than any CEO ever could. Then the gossip site published a hit piece. Fabricated. Petty. With Derek's fingerprints all over it. I didn't respond. Instead, I wrote a letter to every department head. Just one line. I don't answer with noise. I answer with action. Because sometimes hidden revenge isn't loud. It's a quiet refusal to stoop, even when they hand you the shovel. Have you ever been in a room where no one believed in you, and had to decide whether to shrink or stand anyway? That night, I began planning a small art show. Lydia's idea. Nothing flashy, just a space for local artists, our employees, their kids. Something real. Something that couldn't be twisted. They could mock my brushstrokes all they wanted. But this legacy, I was painting it on my own terms. Not every inheritance comes in dollars. Some arrive as silence, as secrets sealed in concrete and lies built into blueprints. And when the foundation finally begins to crack, you're left holding not just a legacy, but the guilt that built it. What would you do if the name you were given came with shadows? Would you keep quiet or speak, knowing the cost might be everything? The Riverbend files didn't scream. They whispered. Emily had requested a full internal audit on every project built in the last 5 years. Not out of paranoia, but instinct. The kind of quiet hum you learn to trust when your life has been made of lies wrapped in ribbon. Riverbend came back first. Steel, recycled, brittle, and never cleared for structural load. Roof trusses that bowed under weight. Thomas sat across from her, lips tight. They signed off on it, Emily. But I found the original specs. Derek changed them before submission. And the inspections? She asked. Forged. Contractors were pressured to meet deadlines, or lose the contract. Her stomach twisted. Not out of shock, out of recognition. This wasn't new. This was betrayal stories dressed as ambition. She halted the project within the hour. Sent out an internal memo. Called the local station herself. The next morning, the papers ran her quote front and center. "Profit means nothing if the people we serve are in danger." She braced for fallout. And it came. One board member threatened to resign. Another called her reckless. Investors grew quiet. Derek sent a lawyered-up email suggesting she was discrediting the family brand. But the most cutting came from inside the room. "You'll sink us," Latimer hissed. "You're trading our future for a sense of moral cleanliness." Emily looked him dead in the eye. "I'd rather lose money than buy silence." She stood taller than she felt. That night she opened her journal. Wrote a single line: "Integrity is expensive, so is cowardice." Then closed the book. The following week, Lydia introduced her to Ava Lynn, a 24-year-old muralist from a nearby arts co-op. Her hands covered in paint, her words sparking like flint. "Why not create something for the people who live where your buildings stand?" Ava asked. The idea became a plan. Emily proposed the Thatcher Creative Fund, 5% of annual profit, reinvested into arts access and youth education, studios grants. Public art, it wasn't just cleanup, it was redemption. The board rolled their eyes. But Thomas stood behind her. The company has enough legacy. It's time it had a soul. Letters began arriving. From residents of Riverbend, from teachers. From a mother who wrote, "My son sleeps better now knowing you didn't look away." Emily hung it above her desk. Then, one morning, she arrived at the office early. Alone. She picked up a piece of chalk and wrote on the brick wall of the lobby. Just above the baseboard, where it could be missed by the uninterested. No structure is worth more than a person's dignity. By noon, someone had traced over it in permanent paint. That afternoon, someone from a national paper called, wanted to ask if she was trying to atone for her family's mistakes. She didn't flinch. "I'm trying to fix what they left cracked." Because maybe this infidelity story wasn't just about a father's poor choices or a brother's manipulations. Maybe it was about how legacies cheat the truth when no one dares to speak it. And what happens when you become the first in your bloodline to say no more. Later that evening, as the office emptied out and the shadows grew long, Emily sat on the floor by the lobby wall, knees pulled to her chest. She traced the words with her fingers. For the first time in months, she didn't feel like the outsider. She felt like the architect. There's a particular kind of silence that follows betrayal. Not the kind that screams or slams doors, but the quiet return of someone who's already broken your trust, now dressed in civility. When a face from your past steps into your future without apology, how do you protect what you've rebuilt? And more importantly, can you forgive without forgetting, and lead without letting them back in? He walked into the boardroom like he'd never left. Derek Thatcher, same tailored suit, same perfect posture. The room shifted, just slightly, like air making space for a storm it remembered too well. "I'm not here to cause trouble," he said, hands open like a man at confession. Emily didn't blink. "We're not hiring." He smiled, all teeth. "Funny, I didn't apply." Thomas looked uneasy. Later, in private, he admitted Derek had offered him a quiet deal. Return his support on the board, and there'd be generous rewards in the next expansion phase. "Did you say yes?" Emily asked. Thomas shook his head. "I said I already gave my word to someone who still believes integrity isn't optional." Emily simply nodded. That kind of loyalty didn't need applause. 2 days later, an article leaked project specs and internal notes to a local tabloid. No names were attached, but the timing was surgical. Emily found the leak, a junior analyst, just 23rd. She didn't raise her voice. She thanked them for their work and let them go. Not to punish, but to protect the team. Then came Derek's latest strike, a video posted under a pseudonym. A slick edit filled with outdated clips of Emily's paintings, spliced against headlines questioning her qualifications. It ended with him saying, "Sometimes love isn't enough to lead." It was polished, insidious, and deeply personal. Emily didn't respond publicly. Instead, she replied by doing what she always had, facing people in real rooms with real hearts. At the Cedar Grove Community Forum, she stood under a flickering light in a church basement filled with folding chairs and folding arms. "I didn't come to clean up my father's name," she said. "I came because what we built made people lose their homes. That matters more than the family crest on the wall." An elderly man stood. "I worked on that site, thought I was building my future. Never thought it'd be my mistake." Emily's throat tightened. "It wasn't your mistake," she said. "It was ours. And I'm here to make it right." Applause didn't come in waves, but in scattered claps, and then more. Not everyone forgave, but someone did. And that was enough for now. Back at the office, she received an anonymous message. "Maybe you're not like him after all." She didn't need to ask who him meant. Derek denounced Cedar Grove on a podcast as moral posturing disguised as social justice. But the media tide had shifted. One headline read, "Emily Thatcher isn't erasing the past. She's building over it." Later that week, after another community meeting, she closed her talk with just one sentence. "I can't change the past, but I can fix what it broke." Because some cheating stories don't involve marriage or lovers, but bloodlines that cheat you out of the truth. And maybe the most honest thing you can say to someone who's hurt you isn't, "I forgive you." It's, "No, you don't get to do that again." Is it possible to hold grace and boundaries in the same hand, especially when it's family? That night, Emily walked through the nearly finished Cedar Grove garden. No cameras, no press. Just dirt, bricks, and the slow miracle of redemption. She didn't build it to be remembered. She built it to make remembering less painful. Not all battles are fought on bloodied fields. Some happen behind polished glass tables, in air-conditioned rooms, where silence is sharpened into accusation. And when family is the one launching the assault, there are no victories, only choices. Do you protect your name or your truth? When revenge wears a necktie and smiles like your brother, how do you hold your soul steady and not let it slip through your fingers? The email subject line read, "Special meeting, immediate." Emily didn't flinch. She knew what it meant. Derek had gathered enough signatures from 2 minor shareholders to force an emergency board session. The room buzzed like a nest of bees disturbed. Derek stood with his usual calm venom, presenting documents on the projector. Reverben's Q2 losses under Emily's leadership now exceed projections by 27%. She approved the spend, she owns the loss, gasps, murmurs. But Emily sat still, flipping open her binder slowly, like a woman setting down her story before the jury. Her voice didn't rise. Her breath stayed even. These figures are based on legacy budgets, drafted before I stepped into this role. All from Derek's administration? Click click. Slide by slide, bite-sized comparisons, emails, signatures. The room grew quieter with each page. She ended with a soft but pointed sentence. We can survive a financial setback. What we can't survive is dishonesty. A long pause. And then, one man stood. I didn't invest in Thatcher because of returns, said a quiet shareholder in the back, his gray tie loosened like a man choosing heart over polish. I invested because for the first time in years, this company felt human again. The vote was swift. Emily remained CEO. Derek stood, jaw clenched, and walked out without a word. No slamming doors. No parting shots. Just the hush of a man losing power and not knowing how to grieve it. Later that night, Emily sat by her window, the old cedar outside brushing against the glass like it was reminding her even things with deep roots can bend. She opened her journal and wrote one line. Victory doesn't always bring peace. Lydia arrived unannounced, holding a copy of Brave Enough. For when the armor feels heavier than the fight, she said, placing it in Emily's lap. Emily flipped to a random page. Her finger landed on Cheryl's words. Doing the right thing is never the wrong thing, even when it feels unbearable. She closed her eyes. Breathed that in. The next morning, she gathered her team, all departments, no titles. A company, wide open session. I know this year has been hard, she began. You've watched your leader attacked not just by the media, but by blood. Her voice cracked, just once. But I believe transparency is what holds a company together. Not perfection. People didn't clap. They leaned forward. She opened the floor, and for the first time, they spoke, not as employees, but as humans. One told a story of her own father's betrayal. Another shared fear of losing work because of the media chaos. Then a voice, soft and unsure, from the back. This is the first time I've believed in a woman leader. Ever? Emily turned, met their eyes, and just nodded. Because sometimes family drama stories don't end with a bang, but with a quiet moment of someone finally seeing you, not as a title, not as a scandal, but as a steady, scarred hand reaching forward anyway. Is it possible that the strongest kind of leadership is the kind willing to be wounded? Later, as dusk washed the walls in gold, Emily stood alone in her office. No champagne, no headlines. Just her hand on the windowpane, the world outside still spinning, and her reflection reminding her she hadn't just survived, she'd stayed soft. Sometimes, the truest legacy isn't left in stone or steel, but in brushstrokes that name what was once hidden. Emily didn't reclaim her father's empire by fighting, she rebuilt it by telling the truth. And when truth is uncomfortable, raw, or soaked in betrayal, what's left behind might not be forgiveness, but something braver. The decision to keep painting, even when the past still echoes through the frame. They called it bold. Emily just called it necessary. The gallery wasn't really a gallery. It was an abandoned warehouse once part of Cedar Grove. The very place where silence had buried too much. She swept the dust off the floor, patched the walls with her own hands, and hung her first full exhibit in over a decade. The places my father never saw. 12 canvases. All blood, breath, and ache. Each piece painted with the kind of honesty that doesn't ask for permission. There was one called Tiled Office, Empty Apology. Another named Blueprints for the Unspoken. But the one that made people stop and go quiet was Cracked Wall, Shattered Heart. It showed a split concrete facade, but in the middle, a soft bloom of watercolor bled through, like grief finding its own light. Emily stood in the corner, watching the crowd shift from curiosity to stillness. Then she saw him. Derek. No announcement, no smugness. Just a man staring at a portrait his pride had never let him acknowledge. He stopped in front of Cracked Wall. Didn't say a word. Didn't need to. Emily didn't greet him. But she didn't stop him either. Some ghosts need space to haunt themselves. A little girl tugged at Emily's sleeve, wide-eyed. Are you scared people won't like you? Emily crouched. Yes. But I'm more scared of pretending I'm someone I'm not. That night, a news headline read, "From Concrete to Canvas, the CEO who told her story in color." Another called it, "Revenge in Watercolor." But Emily hated that word. This wasn't burning revenge. This was a reclaiming, a reckoning, a truth set to dry under gallery lights. The Thatcher Creativity Fund, an idea laughed at just months ago, received its first major endowment from a gallery in Chicago. Enough to sponsor a full year of youth art programs. Enough to turn a failed construction site into something that breathed again. She wrote the exhibit's introduction herself. It didn't boast. It didn't explain. It simply said, "Not because I was right, but because I finally said I was wrong." Derek left before the event ended. No words, no fury, just silence. But silence can mean many things. Sometimes it's shame. Sometimes it's respect. Sometimes it's just letting go. Later that evening, long after the guests had gone, Emily locked up alone. The room still smelled of paint and memory. She walked to the far wall, bare except for one print left unframed, and pressed her palm to the concrete. "This," she whispered, "not concrete, not capital, courage." And quietly, almost as if asking herself, she wondered, can healing ever be complete if it doesn't include the ones who hurt you? In the dark, with her breath clouding against the cold glass, Emily didn't have the answer. But maybe that wasn't the point. Maybe legacy isn't what we inherit. Maybe it's what we dare to rewrite. Sometimes, the world doesn't clap until you've survived the fire, stood up from the ashes, and made something beautiful out of what once tried to destroy you. Then the phone rings. Then the inbox fills. Then the voices return. The ones that once turned their backs. But what does it mean when people only reach for your hand once it's holding a spotlight? The calls started quietly. First, it was Mrs. Eden, Emily's high school art teacher, voice soft with time and memory. "I always knew you had something the world couldn't ignore," she said, like the years of silence between them were a smudge she could just wipe away. Then the texts trickled in. One from Amanda, a college friend who had ghosted her after the cheating stories hit the press years ago. "I was wrong to believe the headlines," she wrote. "You didn't deserve what we all assumed." Emily read the words, let them settle in her chest like sediment in still water. She didn't reply. Not out of cruelty, but because forgiveness has a pace, and it doesn't sprint to meet late arrivals. A message came from one of her father's former site managers. He wanted to meet. "There's more about Cedar Grove you should know," he said. Another piece to the family tales, Emily thought. Each new contact held a sliver of her father's legacy. Good, bad, or burning with hidden revenge. Then came recognition. The Lexington Herald named her one of the Women Reshaping Community Development. Her name listed beneath women she'd once admired from afar. The Thatcher Foundation was quietly nominated for a state humanitarian award. Still, the most jarring message came from Derek. "Maybe Dad was right about you." His text read. Emily didn't reply. She closed the message, locked her phone, and wrote in her journal, "Forgiveness isn't something you offer when someone becomes worthy. You give it when you're strong enough to not carry the weight anymore." That night, Megan stood in the kitchen, her tone half wonder, half sorrow. "Funny," she said, "how people forget your number until the light's on you again." Emily nodded. She didn't need to say anything. Some truths are best left to hang in the quiet, like paintings in a gallery, each person interpreting what they need to see. An email arrived the next morning from a gallery in Chicago. They wanted to sponsor a national tour of her exhibit. "Your work is more than art," it said. "It's a new kind of architecture, one that rebuilds truth." And then came the letter, handwritten, shaky lines from a neighbor who had once told her to keep her voice down when she argued with her father on the porch. "We only heard half the story back then," it read. "Now we understand the other half." That night, Emily sat on the floor, back against the couch, legs stretched out like she used to do in her tiny Portland apartment. The noise was different now, softer, but no less sharp. Praise has its own weight. And not all applause comes without conditions. She picked up her pen and wrote one line in her journal. To be seen doesn't always mean to be understood. And isn't that the question we all carry at some point? When the world finally looks your way, do they see you, or do they just see the light? You think going back will be like slipping on an old sweater, familiar, warm, yours. But what if the house you once called home doesn't recognize you? What if your childhood smells like dust, and the echoes of your name have long been packed into someone else's storage box? Sometimes, returning home doesn't bring comfort, it brings clarity. And that kind of clarity can undo you before it heals you. The house was smaller than Emily remembered. Not physically, but in spirit. It had once been loud with dinners, music, footsteps. Now it stood sterile, gutted of history. Derek had sold off the furniture, painted over the hand-drawn height chart on the doorframe, erased everything that had once whispered, "Emily lived here." She wandered room by room like a ghost inside her own betrayal story, tracing her fingers along the cold walls that no longer carried the warmth of memory. Then, in the garage, tucked behind boxes marked, "Office discard," she found it, a battered shoebox labeled in her mother's slanted script. Inside were faded photographs, a bracelet made from yarn, and one letter, folded so many times it was nearly translucent. Her mother's voice came alive on the page. "If you're reading this, it means you found the courage to come back, and maybe, just maybe, you're ready to see this place with your own eyes, not through someone else's lies." Emily sat down on the cement floor and sobbed. Not the graceful tears of movies, but the hiving kind that echo through rib cages and leave you breathless. For the first time in decades, she felt her mother's presence not as memory, but as anchor. The next day she made the decision the house would become the Thatcher room. Not a shrine to what was, but a space to reckon with what had been silenced. A center for memory, healing, and truth. She hung her father's unfinished sketches next to a sun-worn guitar. Her mother's. She placed her own earliest drawings beside the front window, letting light soften their lines. That week, Derek returned. Unannounced, he didn't speak. He only placed a faded family photo on the mantel and walked out. No note, no apology. Just an image that once might have meant something. Emily left it there, not as invitation, but acknowledgement. A neighbor, now stooped with age, tapped her cane as she smiled. "You used to stand out front during thunderstorms, sketching that old oak. Said it made you brave." Emily laughed, soft and real. Then a school group visited. One child tugged on her sleeve and asked, "Who are you in this house?" Emily paused, then replied, "I'm the one who remembers." That night, she opened a new journal, flipped to the first page, and wrote, "Memory isn't for holding on. It's for not forgetting who you are." And here's the question we're left with. When we return to the places that hurt us, are we seeking answers? Or are we finally ready to rewrite the ending? Some conversations aren't meant to be fixed. They're meant to expose what's been rotting under silence. When Emily agreed to meet Derek, it wasn't forgiveness she was chasing. It was clarity. The kind that doesn't comfort but cleanses. You see, not every betrayal comes from cheating in love. Some stem from blood, from inheritance, from silence. And sometimes, the deepest cuts are made at the family table, not the marriage bed. The letter came in Derek's handwriting, uneven, rushed, almost ashamed. No email, no lawyer, no demand. Just 8 words, "Let me speak." Just once. Face to face. Emily stared at it for a full hour before deciding. Her answer was a location and a condition. Only once. At the coffee shop where Mom used to work. The place still smelled like burnt espresso and old grief. A corner table by the fogged window waited for them. Like it knew this talk had been 20 years late. Derek arrived in a suit too crisp for someone looking for redemption. Emily sat with a manila folder in front of her, hands folded like someone bracing for an earthquake she knew was coming. "I didn't do what they said," Derek began. Emily slid the folder forward. Inside the independent audit, financial discrepancies, emails with his initials. She said nothing, just met his gaze with something stronger than accusation, evidence. He laughed, bitter, broken. "You think this fixes it? You think this makes me the villain?" She spoke, her voice low and deliberate. "I think you made choices that shattered people's lives. And you wore Dad's love like a shield while I had to fight just to be seen." Silence followed. Then, like a dam cracking at its seams, Derek exhaled and whispered, "I hated you. Not because you left, because he never forgave me, but somehow, he gave you everything." Emily's throat tightened. "I lost him while he was still alive. You stole him from me long before he died." Derek's eyes welled, and for the first time, she saw not her rival, not the face in every true infidelity story of blood and betrayal, but a brother with the same grief twisted differently. He wept, not loudly, not for drama, but like a man who hadn't cried since he learned to lie. "I'm not here to forgive you," Emily said gently. "But I am done hating you." She stood, placed a paper napkin and the receipt between them. Scrawled across the bottom, "You pay the rest." As she walked out, Derek stared at his coffee. Cold, untouched, like the years between them. For the first time, he looked smaller than the stories he used to tell. Outside, the wind carried the scent of rain and closure. Emily paused on the sidewalk. She didn't feel triumphant. She felt clean. That night, she wrote in her journal, some stories aren't about who wins. They're about who finally stops bleeding. Megan, ever wise beyond her role as an assistant, found her staring at the night sky and whispered, "Funny how people who once ghosted us now want a seat at our table. After we've built it with our bare hands." Emily didn't answer. She didn't need to. Her silence was her new truth. And somewhere in the middle of that ache and release, she let herself ask the question that lingered longer than anger ever could. When someone says sorry without saying it, do we owe them a response or just a place in our memory? The most dangerous crossroads in life aren't marked by flashing signs or blinking lights. They arrive silently, cloaked as opportunity. You stand there, breath caught, wondering if taking the bigger road will shrink the size of your soul. That was Emily's moment. A path paved with power and influence, but only if she amputated her values. And sometimes, the truest revenge is simply choosing not to become what betrayed you. It came in a leather-bound folder with gold lettering and a silent promise expansion. A real estate conglomerate out of Chicago offered to buy 51% of Whitman & Sons. National reach, exponential profit. But one line snagged at Emily's chest like a thorn. All non-revenue, generating projects, including arts and community outreach, to be reviewed for elimination. What they meant was clear: erase the parts of the company that made it human. And if you got the soul to grow the shell, what's left to lead? She held the proposal like it was radioactive. That night, Emily stared at her mother's old sketch of a sunflower taped on her fridge and whispered, "Is this what we were planting for?" At the next board meeting, she laid the offer on the table. Her voice didn't shake, though her heart did. "This would make us big," she said. "But would it make us better?" Most nodded toward safety, until Megan, sharp as ever, said, "Sometimes what we want isn't what we need to live rightly." Emily didn't sleep for 3 nights. Then, at dawn, she began to write, not in her journal, but a public letter titled, "We don't sell what we can't price." It was elegant. Firm. The media pounced. One headline sneered, "Narve artist rejects real business." But she wasn't rattled, because across town, the community center sent handmade cards from children thanking her for keeping their art space alive. At Tex Boston, Emily stood in front of a red circle and spoke not as a CEO, but as a woman who had once painted with sidewalk chalk just to feel visible. Her voice broke once, on purpose. "Ethics," she said, "aren't strategies, they're compasses. And if you lose your direction chasing size, you'll one day wake up in a place you don't recognize. Worse, one that doesn't recognize you." She closed with something soft but sharp. "It's not how far you grow, it's whether you grew the right way." And far from that stage, in a room lit by the bluish hue of regret, Derek sat watching the live stream. He didn't turn it off. For once. Later that night, Emily walked into the office to find her team gathered quietly around the framed letter from the Chicago firm, now burned into canvas and hung beside her father's blueprints. It read declined. Beneath it, someone had scribbled, "Not all treasure is gold." That evening, while locking the gallery, Emily asked Megan, "Was I foolish to say no?" Megan shrugged, smiled. "Foolish to some, brave to the ones who needed it most." Emily nodded, her throat tight with something neither pride nor sorrow, something older, like clarity. Or peace. And as she looked back toward the hallway lined with kids' drawings and sketches of futures not yet built, a quiet question rose within her, as if whispered by her younger self. Would you still say yes if no one ever clapped? Sometimes healing isn't a scream, it's a whisper inside an empty room. Not triumph but quiet. Not applause, but stillness. After all the battles and betrayals, what if the true revenge isn't to fight back, but to rebuild softer? When Emily Thatcher opened her second art exhibit, it wasn't to prove anything. It was to remember everything, and finally thank the parts of her story she once tried to forget. The warehouse was crumbling at the edges, paint chipped, windows dusty with time. But when Emily stepped inside, it smelled like possibility. She named the exhibit, "Where the Light Once Went Out." A collection of paintings born not from anger, but from grace. There were scenes of alleys in twilight, a woman sitting beneath a dying street lamp, a child painting sunlight onto cardboard walls. Each canvas a truth, unvarnished. Each brushstroke a moment survived. She hung them in the space deliberately. No music, no champagne. Just raw, open quiet. At the opening, a little girl in a polka dot dress tugged her sleeve and asked, "Were you ever scared?" Emily knelt. "Every day," she said with a smile. "But I kept walking anyway." One painting made the room go still. Her mother, strumming a guitar by lamplight, the shadows wrapping her like a memory no one ever named. People cried, some prayed. No one spoke for a full minute. Halfway through the night, Derek arrived. He stayed at the back, behind a sculpture of broken bricks and a painted quote from their father. Emily saw him, didn't walk toward him, didn't turn away either, she just nodded. A kind of truce, unspoken and unfinished. And maybe that was enough. The press covered it again. From concrete to color. How Emily Thatcher is redefining legacy. One headline read. But Emily didn't need the headlines anymore. What mattered were the people standing shoulder to shoulder. Teachers, janitors, retired steelworkers. Whispering. She painted what we couldn't say out loud. Later that night, Megan hugged her tight. You became the woman you needed as a girl, she whispered. The one who didn't disappear. And that was when Emily knew. She didn't need to answer the 5-state exhibition invitation yet. Some journeys don't stretch wider. They stretch deeper. The building emptied out. Silence returned, soft as breath. Emily stood in the center of that forgotten room, turned, cathedral, and picked up a piece of chalk. On the brick wall, in a hand both trembling and sure, she wrote, I found the light again, in the very shadows that once dimmed me. Somewhere outside, a camera flash. She didn't turn. This moment wasn't for the world. It was for the girl inside her who once thought she was too broken to shine. And maybe that's the real burning revenge. To return to the places that failed you, and bless them with your becoming. Maybe that's how we undo family betrayal, not by rewriting the tale, but by painting the truth until it's finally seen. As the lights dimmed, she asked herself, quietly, honestly, if no one came to applaud, would I still open the door? Forgiveness doesn't always arrive like a miracle. It sometimes crawls in, battle-worn, dragging its feet through the ashes of family tales. When you're handed the power to punish the one who broke you, the real question becomes, what kind of story do you want to write next? One about justice, or one about becoming free? Emily Thatcher didn't expect her greatest act of leadership to be the choice not to strike back. The envelope arrived with no warning. Stamped with the seal of the district attorney's office, it was crisp, legal cold. Derek was under official investigation, fraud, mismanagement, falsifying company records. The kind of charges that don't just end careers, they end legacies. Emily stared at it from across the room for 2 days. Didn't touch it. Didn't speak of it. She felt the ache return. The betrayal, the hidden revenge of knowing someone once loved could cause so much harm and still sleep at night. Then the board meeting came. We need your final position, one senior member said. Do we press charges? Justice was a stone in her chest. Heavy, cold. Tempting. But when she closed her eyes, she didn't see Derek in handcuffs. She saw him as a boy, 10 years old, holding a flashlight under a blanket, drawing blueprints like Dad used to. And maybe that's what broke her the most, not what he became, but who he used to be. Megan leaned in quietly. Not every act of mercy is weakness. Sometimes it's what only the strong can afford. Emily proposed an alternative: no courtroom, no headlines. Derek would spend the next 2 years working, unpaid, in their most difficult community rebuilding projects. Under supervision, without privilege, without voice. He'd earn back what he lost, brick by brick. One shareholder scoffed. No, Emily replied calmly. It's a human one. They voted. The motion passed. Derek accepted the sentence without a word. For the first time, he didn't look like someone preparing to fight. He looked like someone prepared to listen. That night, Emily wrote in her journal, I didn't forgive him because he earned it. I forgave him because I refused to be tethered to this rage another year. She stood at her office window as dusk spilled in. In dry marker, she wrote a sentence on the glass. Freedom begins when we let go of what we can't rewrite. She didn't cry. But she did feel something loosen, like a seam torn open, not to fall apart but to let air in. Later, as she walked past the quiet halls, she whispered aloud, Is it still justice if it heals us both? Sometimes the most powerful foundations are built not of stone, but of sorrow, of survival, of silent battles no one sees. Emily didn't lay bricks that morning in South Lexington. She laid memory, forgiveness, and every tear she'd swallowed behind boardroom doors. When the scissors cut the ribbon, it wasn't just for a new housing project. It was a ribbon on her past, tied, acknowledged, and finally released. The ribbon fluttered in the early light like something alive. Emily stood before the new complex, 32 homes, humble but dignified, built on land where broken promises once stood. Her fingers trembled around the silver scissors. But when she cut, it felt like she'd cut more than nylon. She'd severed the last thread binding her to the version of herself that believed survival required silence. A small boy pushed past the crowd and handed her a crumpled piece of paper. His drawing, crude, bright, sincere, showed a house with wide windows and a sun that smiled. At the top he had scrawled in red crayon, "You build with kindness, not bricks." She knelt, tears warming her cheeks, wondering how truth always found its way into the mouths of children. The media was there, of course. Cameras, mics, the usual noise. But this time, they weren't asking about betrayal stories or the true infidelity story that once made her infamous. They weren't digging for cheating scandals, financial collapse, or family blame. This time, they called it what it was, one of the most compassionate urban housing models in the state. That night, back in her office, Emily opened a fresh journal and wrote 4 words. Rebuild. A book begins. She wasn't done telling the truth. She was just learning to tell it from the healed side. A call came from the local university. They asked her to teach a course on leadership and social ethics. She almost declined. Imposter syndrome still crawled in her shadow, but she thought of the women she'd met through the foundation's new financial literacy program. Survivors of abuse, neglect, economic violence. If they could return to themselves, so could she. The classroom became another kind of home. A student once stayed after, voice shaky with disbelief, "You made me believe women can lead and not lose their softness." Emily didn't answer right away. Instead, she asked, "When was the last time you let someone see the part of you that trembled? And didn't apologize for it?" Meanwhile, Derek had requested to be transferred. No fanfare, no permission asked. He simply showed up at the Early Learning Center sponsored by the Thatcher Foundation and began cleaning, then fixing toys, then listening. Quietly, Megan was the one who told her. "Sometimes," she said, handing Emily a folder, "change isn't loud. Sometimes it's just one silent step in the right direction." And that was it. Emily walked the halls of the South Lexington complex at dusk, where laughter echoed off the walls she had once only dreamed of standing. In a small window, a woman stirred a pot. In another, a boy danced in socks. None of them knew what it had cost her to build this place. And they didn't need to. Because healing, real healing, never comes with applause. It arrives quietly, with open doors and the sound of children sleeping safely inside. That night, she stood alone outside the last finished unit and whispered into the bricks, "This is for the ones who never stopped believing in me. Even when I did." Sometimes, letting go isn't surrender. It's sacred. It's standing at the door of something you built with your bare hands, whispering, "It's ready now." And walking away not because you've run out of love, but because you've loved it enough. Emily didn't retire, she released. And in doing so, she gave the future room to bloom where her shadow had once stood watch. The offer came in a blue envelope, heavy like grief. An international architecture firm wanted to buy 80% of the company. Their promise was tempting: no name changes, no value dilution, just exponential growth. But Emily had lived long enough to know, when power knocks politely, it rarely comes without a suitcase of conditions. She gathered her team, not to dictate, but to listen. In the open floor meeting, she answered every question. She didn't dodge, didn't spin. A young woman from accounting stood up and asked quietly, "If you leave, who will protect what you created?" Emily didn't answer her. Not then. That night, she drove past city limits to a forgotten corner where her mother's first home once stood. It was a laundromat now, humming with fluorescent loneliness. She pressed her palm to the cool window and remembered the rusted porch swing, the chipped blue paint, her mother's laughter echoing through unpaid bills. The beginning, and she remembered why she ever started. An old man shuffled past. He recognized her. "Worked with your daddy," he said. "You know, legacy's not about holding tight. It's about knowing when to pass the baton and making damn sure it's clean." She didn't cry, not yet. But the message stuck like sap on her skin. A week later, she made her decision. She sold. But not without rewriting the rules. She retained control of the Thatcher Foundation, embedded ethical clauses into every future contract, and secured funding guarantees for community art and housing. They could grow, but only in the direction her soul could stand behind. In her farewell letter to staff, she wrote, "Sometimes you stop not because you're tired but because you've finally arrived." The media called it graceful. Calculated. Bold. Derek sent her a text, the kind that doesn't seek reply. "You did what Dad never could." On her last day, she took nothing from the office except a sketch. An unfinished one of her mother, sitting in the light, guitar on lap. She stood on the rooftop of the company headquarters and watched the city blink awake below. "To leave," she whispered, "is sometimes the only way to truly stay." Some truths don't knock. They wait, silent and patient, hidden in the dusty corners of our lives, until the day we're finally strong enough to hear them. Emily didn't find the tape by chance. She found it because the ache had ripened into readiness. And sometimes, healing isn't a grand gesture. It's a trembling voice from the past whispering, "I was wrong. And I loved you even then." It was just another box, one of many tucked behind years of clutter in her office. But this one was marked in her father's handwriting, for Emily. "If you're strong enough to listen." She hesitated. Strength, she had learned, was not about armor. It was about cracking open. She slid the cassette into an old player she hadn't used since college. A hiss, then his voice, raspy, tired, familiar, like an old coat you forgot still fit. "Emily, if you're hearing this, it means I never said what I needed to." She froze. "I made mistakes. Not the kind you fix with money, the kind that build walls between fathers and daughters. But I watched you, even when I didn't say it, at galleries, fundraisers, always under a different name. I was proud, but ashamed of how little I'd earned the right to be." The tape word paused, then continued, softer now. "You taught me, even when I failed you. You didn't just rebuild the company, you rebuilt me. Whether you knew it or not." Emily sat on the hardwood floor, her knees to her chest, the windows dimmed with twilight. Her journal lay open beside her, ink bleeding from pages soaked with tears. She didn't cry out loud. She cried in the kind of silence only regret and relief know how to share. That night, she recorded his words into her manuscript, turning them into the preface for Rebuilt, a story of broken things made whole. At her book launch, before an audience of 200, she played the tape. For many, it was the voice of their own fathers, lovers, betrayals echoing in that room. A woman clutched her chest. A man bowed his head. The room didn't clap, it breathed. Emily dedicated the book to those forgotten by the ones they loved. You were never the mistake. The book climbed the New York Times bestseller list, but what mattered more was the email from a battered women's shelter, saying the book had become their new group therapy text. Derek sent a letter. Not typed. Written. "I used to think you survived the storm. But now I see. You became the lighthouse for others still inside it." Emily added his words, anonymously, to the epilogue. The final chapter closed with this. "The end isn't where things stop. It's where we begin again. This time, in our own voice. We don't always get the home we longed for as children, but sometimes, if we survive, if we rebuild, if we dare to become the people we once needed, we end up offering that home to others." Emily didn't just heal her wounds, she turned them into open doors. And in doing so, she reminded us all that legacy isn't what we leave behind. It's what we light up in someone else. The sky was still dark when Emily unlocked the doors of the Emily Thatcher Center for the very first time. Portland fog rolled low over the city, softening every edge, like the beginning of something holy. Inside, 12 folding chairs formed a circle, each seat waiting for a girl who had once been told she wouldn't make it. They came in slowly, nervous, guarded, wide-eyed, some from forgotten towns, some carrying babies, all of them carrying dreams too fragile to name out loud. Emily greeted each one with something she hadn't received enough of: her self-belief. She walked them through the center. Art studios smelling of turpentine and hope, small classrooms where they'd learn how to read a contract, how to ask for more, how to say no. And on the wall, framed in oak, the first rule of the house. No one is too broken to begin again. She brought them back to Lexington for one day. She showed them where she grew up, where her mother worked, where her father's voice still echoed in her bones. And on the soil of the old garage, she planted an oak sapling. Her hands in the dirt, her past in the roots. One girl asked, "Are you still scared, Emily?" She looked at the girl's face, which reminded her of her own at 17. Sharp, tender, trying too hard not to care. "I am," Emily said. "But now I know how to carry fear without letting it steer." Later that week, Derek came. He didn't enter. He stood outside the fence, left a blank journal at the gate. Inside the front cover, no message, just space. Emily ran her fingers across the cover and whispered, "Blank pages. Finally mine to write, not for anyone else." She titled her final painting, "The Keeper of Light." An abstract self-portrait, half shadow, half lantern. It hung in the main hallway. The first thing every girl would see when they arrived, and the last when they left. On the morning of the second cohort's first day, Emily sat alone in the courtyard, scarf billowing in the wind. She looked at the sun cutting through the clouds, smiled softly, and whispered, "I did it, Mama." She had not taken revenge. She had transformed it. That's the thing no one tells you about burning revenge. If you're not careful, it becomes the fire that consumes you. But if you're lucky, if you're kind, it becomes the light you pass forward. And isn't that what family tales are for? Not to relive betrayal, but to rewrite the ending.